Well, I patted myself on the back at the end of March for adjusting to my church life going to Zoom and my volunteer work morphing to online and my social life becoming virtual. A lot of learning there, but it was very satisfying. I hope you all patted yourself on the back too. But by the end of April, I was tired of looking at my face on a computer screen. And I thought that I was mourning a canceled trip to see my son. But keeping in mind that these were all small sacrifices for the health and the common good, I kept on keeping on. And I'll bet you did too. Resilience, which is a physical and emotional, cognitive, and spiritual skill that allows us to keep on keeping on, to live our lives fully throughout all the changes and disasters and illnesses and losses that are a part of all of our lives. And we've had more than our share lately. And then came May and the news that we wouldn't be singing together for a long, long time. For some reason, that's the thing I had my good cry about. I wonder what it was for you. And then it was June, and I started longing to see my sister in person and for a meal that I didn't have to fix and to get back to the gym. And while some things opened then here, it also became clear that Americans weren't going to have the discipline or leadership to muster the resilience it would take to keep things open. And they started to close down again. After 2 weeks, I left my gym. Great exercise, but they weren't enforcing the mask mandate. And while I wasn't really nervous about getting COVID, I found that I didn't want to be there. It was such a disappointment. And then came August and all those pictures, the school in Georgia exposing teens and their dedicated teachers by the thousands, and Florida, where a sheriff has forbidden his staff or even the visitors to his department to wear masks, and the motorcycle rally in South Dakota, not to mention what's happening in Washington. I was just sort of flattened. It happens. But here I am, and here you are. Being resilient doesn't mean being upbeat and ready for everything with a smile all the time. It means coping most of the time, and sometimes while fighting a bad mood, but still living, growing, and learning. But this was a hard week to write about resilience, so I'm going to let my little dog help me because he's been through a pretty hard time of his own lately, and he came through it very resiliently. So this is Mosby. Cute, huh? And you notice the attitude. Mosby has thought since he was a puppy that his job in life was to protect his family from all threats. For instance, pickup trucks, skateboards, bicyclists, and especially any member of that extremely dangerous species, canine. It makes peaceable walks quite a challenge. So we walk him early in the morning when nobody else is about, and we installed a doggy door for him so that he can have quality time outside in the safety and privacy of our walled backyard. Well, one morning in the middle of our lockdown, I discovered him in our nice, safe backyard with blood all over his face. The vet said it was probably a raccoon he had tangled with, and she commented that he was lucky to have come out of it with just a slashed face. She brought him back to me with a cleaned up face, antibiotics, and a cone. Want to see? Oh, poor Mosby. And all he was doing was trying to protect his family. Well, I'd heard plenty of jokes about dogs and cones, but watching a dog get accustomed to a cone, oh my gosh, it is pathetic. They bump into everything, which jerks their head around. They have to learn how to get at their food and water. They can't use their doggy door. They can't groom themselves. They can't jump on the furniture. They can't scratch their ears. They can go on walks, but their senses of sight and hearing and smell are all changed. And of course, they don't understand a bit of it. A cone, in other words, is a major adversity for a dog, well worth all the anger and frustration Mosby could throw at it. which he did at first. He tried over and over to escape all these changes by charging out his now too small doggy door. Denial. He growled at us when we tried to help. Displaced anger. He curled up in his bed and stared at us with his big doggy eyes. Depression. Sound familiar? Well, it worked for him. We pampered him and we fed him his favorite fancy food from a spoon, while he alternately moped and tried and failed to do all his things the old way. Poor little guy. Lots of changes to cope with, lots of learning to do, and his nose probably still hurt too. But you know, the next morning, cone and all, he was ready for his walk, insistent even. So I leashed him up and off we went. And from that moment on, in spite of all the bumps and annoyances, the changes and the aggravations, which went on for a whole week, Mosby, by gosh, led his life. He's fine now. Mosby's heroic defense of his family and his resilient response happened just about the time James asked me to preach this morning. So I was thinking about this sermon and what my little dog has to teach us about resilience, which, as you've heard, is the ability to bounce back from adversities so that we can live our lives fully in spite of all the stresses and strains and disasters which happen to us all. Material objects, like, say, rubber bands, show resilience when they snap back to their original shape after they've been stressed by stretching. This is simple resilience. If you've been using masks with elastic ear bands, you've probably noticed that that elastic is very resilient for the first dozen uses and washings, and then it gets kind of flabby. It can't snap back anymore. Eventually it becomes useless. Can't do what it was meant to do, which was to keep that mask close to your face. Even simple resilience is very important. Resilience in living beings is more complex. Part of it's physical, our ability to heal when we are hurt, to recover from illness, to recuperate from exertion. This power to restore ourselves is a miracle of life, but it's up to us to help it along with good habits of healthy living. Mosby was quite right to insist on his walk, even with his difficult to manage cone. It was what he could do to encourage his healing, getting out and getting his exercise. You want to be doing what you can to nurture your physical resilience too. The second set of habits that promote resilience are habits of clear logical thinking, as well as heartfelt emotional intelligence. It's hard to bounce back when you indulge in fuzzy cognition, from wishful thinking, conspiracy theories, to denial or willful cluelessness. Fuzzy thinking, I'm afraid, is more endemic than the pandemic these days. It means that our own individual, group, and state good thinking are all the more critical. So resilience means checking our facts, remembering our logic, knowing the ways we are likely to try and kid ourselves, and all of us kid ourselves in some ways, and conversing with others who value finding truth and values over being doctrinaire. Mosby's first reaction to his cone was to go on as if nothing had changed at all. That's denial. It's one of the most powerful kinds of human fuzzy thinking. In denial mode, he tried repeatedly to escape out his doggy door, now too small for his increased diameter, with very painful results. And he was in no mood to pay attention to me either, although I could have helped. Thinking he knows it all is a persistent cognitive bias of Mosby's, which I am sorry to say he is completely unaware of. But you're smarter than that, right? Wisdom is knowing what you don't know and getting help when you need it. Intellectual honesty and facing facts is, in the end, the key to finding solutions and learning what we need to learn in a new or stressful situation. That's not always fun. It's just necessary. Being resilient, you see, doesn't mean you will feel great all the time. It means you will be able to tolerate, learn, and grow in spite of feeling bad. While your nose still hurts and your ears don't seem to work and you have to maneuver a strange new obstacle to get to your very own water dish, the way to keep your spirits up, as well as to master your situation, is to learn something new. Figure it out. Make something work. Our nation is showing itself lately to be not very good at feeling bad. We're awash in counterproductive behavior. Motorcycle rallies, beach parties, pulling a gun on a poor guy whose job is to ask you to put on your mask to go inside. What's going on? Well, we know there are some folks who simply don't believe that COVID-19 is something they should worry about, and they're indulging themselves in fuzzy thinking, and we all take the consequences for that. And there's some people who flaunt their lack of social distancing as a sign that they belong to the Trump tribe. But my strong guess is that most of the people in those pictures that we've been deluged with lately have no particular political agenda and are pretty smart in their daily lives. And they're knowingly taking a risk with their health because they just can't stand to feel bad for one more day. Not knowing how to cope when you feel bad is a problem. And that's one thing we could be learning in this crisis, or in any crisis. That's a matter of attending to our spiritual lives. We use the word spiritual very broadly. Here's one definition. The spiritual part of our lives is our attention to meaning and cultivating a sense of mental and emotional calm. So, if somebody had clapped my head into a cone and wouldn't take it off, I would not be a happy camper. I would be disabled, and that would take some adjusting to. Pain and problem. Mosby would understand. But if I wasn't careful, I would add to my own pain and problems with my undisciplined mind. How dare they, I might say to myself. This is so unfair. I must have done something wrong to deserve this, I might think. What's wrong with me? Mosby knows nothing of such self-talk, being a simple dog. But I do, and you probably do too. I've had to practice shutting down that kind of self-talk, or talking back to it, which I learned to do in meditation and in therapy. I'm still subject to all the painful disappointments and disabilities and changes that we all are, but I really work at not making them worse by cultivating calm and reminding myself not to believe everything I find myself thinking. And I also pay attention to the things that give meaning to my life, and I try to live out what I think of as my purpose. I'm more complicated than my little dog, of course, who is not able to soothe his cone sufferings by remembering that he got them by doing what he thinks of as his bounden duty. But I can remember that. Believe me, during the week that I was up and down, letting him in and out of the backyard, scratching his ears, giving him his pills, I reminded myself that he got into this condition by earnestly protecting me from a predator who could have easily been twice his size. Remembering that love and that meaning was an important part of my spiritual life that week, as I remembered what was important to me. And by the way, institutions and societies and nations also experience resilience. And because they're made up of people, their resilience resembles the humankind. It's not only a matter of bouncing back, but of learning, growing, and developing greater ability to face the future effectively. So a resilient congregation in these COVID-19 days, for instance, would be a congregation that was not clamoring to go back to the way things were in January, but rather a congregation asking, what have we learned? Who can we serve now? What's the purpose of this congregation, and how can we fulfill it in current conditions? I hear you're that kind of a congregation, and I honor you for that. And I honor each of you. So far in your lives, each and every one of you, even those of you who are feeling very battered right now, have ridden the waves of life successfully and resiliently. With a little help from friends and faith and our basic habits of self-care, in part because we discipline ourselves to live out our values, to think clearly, to cultivate peace in our minds and hearts so that we don't make feeling bad any worse than it already is. We mostly manage to be resilient enough to ride even big waves of change, which are a part of all that is our lives. Blessings in this hard time. May you use it resiliently to heal, to learn, to grow in wisdom and spirit and love.